Welcome to the Plant-Centered and Thriving Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Kitchens.
Hello and welcome, plant-centered listeners. We are so happy that you are here with us today. Just thought we'd change it up a little bit. I'll be doing your intro, but don't you worry, Ashley will be right back with this crazy, amazing interview that we have for you today. We did want to give you a quick heads up that we did experience a little bit of technical difficulties in this episode with a little bit of echoing. We didn't want to scrap the whole episode because it's so good. So it's just a few times throughout this episode. So again, we do apologize for that, but just wanted to give you a little heads up. So I'm sure you guys have probably heard in the media recently about lab-grown meat. Well, we welcome Kaitlin. She's the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Public Affairs at Clever Carnivore, Chicago's first cultivated meat company. So that's one of the first things we talk about. It's actually not called lab-grown meat. The industry vernacular they prefer is cultivated meat, and we will dive into why that is and why that's important. Kaitlin is not only their director, but also a 30-year vegetarian and 10-year vegan. So I am so excited to hear her particular perspective on why she chose to work for a meat company. So she dives into why that is important to her. And this conversation was fascinating. I cannot wait to hear your reactions to this. I can't wait to hear if you guys are interested in trying cultivated meat after this episode, or if that's something you are like, no way, no how, not in this lifetime. So we get into so many different things. First and foremost, what is cultivated meat? What is the industry definition at this point? How it's made? What are the big differences between cultivated meat and regular meat? What are the environmental impacts of this new product? And should vegans even eat this? Is this something that we should encourage ourselves to eat, or is this something that is just for those heavy-duty meat eaters? And when can we expect to see these in grocery stores? And hint, guys, it is not far away. So again, I don't want to make you guys wait any longer. Check out this amazing episode with Ashley and Kaitlin. Let us know on social media what you think. I cannot wait to hear your reactions. All right, let's get to the show.
Honestly, Caitlin, what I'm curious to know is, so you were in Durham for a little while, which is how we originally got connected, like through, was it the vegan?
It was the vegan drinks meetup.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. And then from there, like, what's been going on with you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I moved to Chicago in January 2020. Basically, I had been living in North Carolina most of my life and was interested in just checking out a new city. And some of my requirements for the city were great public transit. I hate driving. I'm a big transit person. Great vegan options. I just generally enjoy being in metropolitan areas. So I ended up finding a job at Chicago, moved to Chicago, but soon thereafter got a job with the Good Food Institute, which, as you may know, is a nonprofit think tank that works to accelerate alternative proteins. And this is kind of really where my interests lie. So I was at GFI for a while, and then now I'm working for Clever Carnivore, which is a startup actually based in Chicago. So it's really cool to actually be able to like come into the office, connect with my colleagues, and just really feel like I'm part of a company that really is integrated into the city, and that's part of the, you know, the city's economy, and just like, so yeah.
I did not know that. So were those part of your interests when we first met, which I know was like a long time ago at this point, but...
Yeah, so I actually started becoming interested in alternative proteins, I would say around 2016. I'd been involved in kind of the plant-based movement, I would say, probably for about 6 to 10 years prior to that, primarily around the areas of, encouraging folks to reduce their meat consumption, choose plant-based options, and things of that nature. But what I really perceived, both anecdotally and I think sort of from a global perspective as well, is that consumer education does not, unfortunately, always change consumer behavior. And so I really found that, I was asking people to eat less meat, and yet I saw that 2022 saw the highest per capita meat consumption in recorded history. And so I really started thinking like, okay, if we can't educate consumers into reducing their meat consumption, what can we do? And it was around that time that I started learning about the Good Food Institute and alternative proteins and sort of this theory of change that if we create products that taste the same or better and cost the same or less as conventional meat, that people are likely to try it. Consumer studies have shown that people ultimately care about taste, price, and convenience. And so, I really think that if we're able to make alternatives to conventional meat that reach taste and price parity, that people are likely to seek them out, which we're kind of, I believe, finding in the plant-based space. I know the Impossible Burger, the number one demographic for that is omnivores. So it's really exciting to see that there are, folks who are maybe reducitarians or, do often eat meat, but they're sometimes choosing the plant-based option because it tastes good and is affordable.
Yeah. I remember reading that about Impossible and Beyond, that they were both talking about how their consumers, they're not pushing out this product specifically for vegans. It's really for people who eat both, like meat and plants, which I thought that was really fascinating, but really great for people who are, like you said, looking to reduce the amount of meat they're eating or try an alternative that's similar to what they're eating.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I didn't know, just because you brought it up, Caitlin, that our highest meat consumption was in 2022, because especially with dairy right now, there's kind of this decline in consumption and they're really pushing like the ads and different things like that. I'm sure you all have seen them on social media, but meat, I did not know that about meat.
Yeah, and that's a global figure. So I think that, in some countries, as sort of the economies grow, meat is viewed as a luxury item, and so people are more likely to seek it out. But I think even in the US, and I'm not sure about the statistic, but I know that people are choosing more plant-based options, but at the same time, meat consumption is increasing, I believe. After learning that, I was like, okay, I think that plant-based advocacy is really important, and I still do it, especially among my friends and colleagues, and just try to sort of be a positive example of a person that adheres to a plant-based diet. But in terms of, the impact that I want to make on the world, I think that working in alternative proteins is kind of feels like a good fit for me in terms of making these more like systems level changes.
Yes. And I want to talk about that. I want to talk about what you're doing. I want to talk about Clever Carnivore. But first, can you explain to us and maybe let us know like the proper terminology for lab grown meat and exactly what it is, and kind of like walk us through how, like the process and how it's even cultivated?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the nomenclature we use and that I think sort of the industry is rallying around is cultivated meat. And the reason for that is because it truly is the most accurate description of what we're doing, which is cultivating meat from small samples of animals. So, I think lab grown meat is probably the sort of like what's in the zeitgeist right now. And I think that isn't always an accurate reflection of what's actually happening, because what we're doing actually is more of a brewery type setting. We're growing meat in these large bioreactors that are very similar to fermentation tanks. In fact, we do get a lot of our equipment from the brewery industry, from even like the cosmetic industry. We have got one of our mixing tanks from there. So we're doing a lot of repurposing from other industries. So yeah, cultivated meat certainly I think is the most accurate. Some people say things like cell-based meat or cell-cultured meat. And I think that actually doesn't provide any additional clarification, because conventional meat is made of cells. We're made of cells. Plant-based meat is made of cells. So saying cell-based is kind of just saying like, it doesn't really provide clarification about what it is. So, and then some people are saying cultured meat, which I think there can be some confusion there, because aquaculture is a type of fish farming. So we just think, and I think there was like a consumer study that showed that with education, that cultivated meat is the most palatable and also the most accurate description of what we're actually doing. So we say cultivated meat. So cultivated meat is actual meat that is grown outside the animal. So basically it's made by producing initially a very small non-invasive skin sample from an animal. And then that sample is grown in bioreactors and fed something that's called a cell culture media, which is basically just a nutrient-rich liquid, contains things like all the things your cells need to grow. So vitamins, minerals, amino acids, water, salt. In my opinion, I always call it like the cell's Gatorade, because, and I think technically I think some of the scientists here have actually tried the media. So it's totally all stuff that's needed in your body to grow. And so we take that sample and put it in the media. So we're basically feeding the media to the cells, and that produces real animal muscle. This is a very simplified version, by the way, but basically it's doing something that we've actually been doing in human therapeutics for a long time. And just applying it to growing meat. And actually it's really interesting because you're able to grow muscle, but you can also change the media and you're able to grow fat. So of course, meat is made up of actual animal meat and also fat. So we're able to do all of this. So what I like to say is that we're recreating the conditions inside of an animal outside the animal. So it's just producing meat in a different way. And so like the cell media is the same temperature as the animal's body. It really is saying like what happens inside an animal, in our case, a pig, and let's do it outside the animal.
Wow. I mean, it's just so wild that we are able to do this. I mean, what brilliant people are behind this kind of stuff. I mean, it's just so innovative. And the fact that you mentioned it's non-invasive, so it sounds like no harm is done to the animals. Like, what does that even look like? Are they taking like tweezers and like picking out something? How does that work?
Yeah, that's right. And this is really important to me as a person who is vegan for a lot of reasons, but primarily for the animals. Basically, there's just like a small incision that's made and a little bit of the skin is taken, but that can be numbed and then it's kind of sewed back up. So it's, in my opinion, the least harm possible to an animal, and hopefully it's not hurting them. And also compared to the way that we factory farm 9 billion animals a year, I think that taking a really small incision is, and especially because in the case of most cultivated meat companies, that small sample can provide an infinite amount of meat because of the nature of how cells replicate. So for us, for example, we have cells from a pig and we will never have to go back to that animal to get additional samples, and we will be able to make meat basically ad infinitum, so forever.
Wow.
I think that also kind of speaks to how efficient cultivated meat is, rather than, having to grow crops to feed animals, to, feed them water, to have them on transportation trucks and go to slaughter. We are making meat right here in this very innocuous looking office building. So the supply chain's a lot shorter and it's far fewer resources, much better for the environment. And I know that some cultivated meat companies actually have, like I saw that one of them, he's making cultivated lamb. I was looking at the employees there and they have Lucy the lamb as one of they were like, Lucy provided our initial cells and now she's living freely and, roaming the prairie.
Yeah.
So it's really cool. And I think for me, like knowing that we are able to make real animal meat without harming animals is really just such an innovative and amazing thing.
Yeah. And I definitely want to go back to that environmental impacts. I think it's really important to talk about just all the areas that this can potentially impact for the greater good. Mm-hmm. But you had mentioned something about kind of adjusting. You mentioned like kind of the fat, like you can grow fat and muscle. Does that mean that we can kind of adjust the fat content of some of the meat that we are growing so that maybe like quote healthier, or it's less saturated fat laden? Like, what does that look like?
That's exactly right, Ashley. Yeah, great question. So basically what we're making is identical to conventional meat. However, we do have the room to kind of tailor. So for example, in terms of like the health benefits of this product, it is conventional meat, but we don't have to include cholesterol. So it could be a cholesterol-free animal meat product. As you mentioned too, yes, we are able to adjust the meat to fat ratio. So if you wanted to make a low fat product or even a higher fat product for people, for example, I know keto, I do not endorse keto by the way, but for people interested in like a higher protein keto diet or something, that we could, make a higher fat content. And also worth noting in terms of health that our product is 100% free of antibiotics. Whereas conventional meat, I learned this stat recently, it's absolutely staggering to me, that over 70% of antibiotics globally are fed to farmed animals to keep them, even healthy ones, just to keep them well, because of the nature of, they're crammed into these small, it's 20,000 chickens in a shed. Of course, that's going to breed disease. So they're just preemptively fed antibiotics, which of course has massive human health implications in terms of antibiotic resistance. Not a very fun topic, but I think important to note that our product doesn't have antibiotics and it's produced in a very clean environment.
Wow. So there really is no need for, because I grew up on an Angus cattle farm. So antibiotics, obviously, yes, were necessary. And then so were like steroids and different things to like make the animals grow faster. So there probably isn't a need for that either.
Yep. No steroids. Yep. And our product also, we are able to say that it's not genetically modified, so non-GMO. And I will say that I think that there is, like, I'm pro-GMO, like as in, I think there's a lot of anti-science fear mongering around GMOs, but for people who are concerned about that, it is a non-GMO product. So it's, non-GMO, antibiotic-free, steroid-free. We're bringing the the experience of conventional meat, because it is real meat, without many of the negative externalities of conventional animal farming.
Yeah. Wow. Well, and so Caitlin, how long does it take? Because you used kind of the brewery as an example. I know some beers can maybe take a few weeks, while others you could have them, I don't know, sitting in those whatever they are for like years, aging. So how long does this approximately take? Or is there a timeline for it?
That's a really great question. Yeah, I was actually just talking to some of my colleagues about this, and they estimated that probably from the initial cell to actually having a sausage takes about 10 days.
What?
So, which is really crazy to think about. But basically, yeah, and I actually have to say it's really interesting because we just hired a new food scientist who actually came to us from Tyson, where he spent over 30 years making meat. So really
Wow.
kind of a great fit for us. We needed someone to come in and make sausage. So he started recently, and he's actually already making cultivated meat products, and they're actually partially plant-based. So at the moment, our current product is about, I would say, and we're iterating on this. I think we have a goal to have a high cultivated meat inclusion rate, but at the moment it's about 90% plant-based, 10% cultivated meat. So just kind of gradually incorporating cultivated meat into the product. And I got to try it last week, and I had not had meat in 31 years.
Oh my gosh.
And I had never had meat from a mammal before. I'm like a pretty lifelong vegetarian.
Yeah.
But the product we're making it's actually a cultivated bratwurst. It's going to be called the Clever Bratwurst.
Ooh.
And so, yeah, I was able to try it and basically try pork for the first time, which was such a wild. It's seriously, my brain could not fathom what was happening when I was
I'm
eating
sure.
it. Mhm.
Well, that was something I was going to ask you, Caitlin, is like, what does this mean for vegans and plant-based eaters in terms of like, would you, because I knew that you hadn't eaten meat in a really long time. I did not know that you hadn't ever not eaten animals, or mammals. What does that, like, I guess, you've obviously already tried it, so that's what I was going to ask you, but what does this mean for maybe other vegans? Like, have you heard like what people say or what they're thinking in terms of whether or not they would try it?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Ashley. Essentially, like I feel personally that cultivated meat is not necessarily for vegans and vegetarians. Something like 95+% of people on earth eat meat. And so we are making cultivated meat for the people that, want to eat animal meat. I do believe that like there is a certain type of person, and probably a lot of the population, who even when the plant-based products are reaching taste and price parity, they just simply want to eat meat from an animal. And I've sort of seen this anecdotally through my vegan activism and just sort of seeing these trends. I do feel that there are certain people that just want to eat real meat. And so cultivated meat is providing that because it is real meat from an animal. And so I would say first that cultivated meat primarily, I think the primary target is current omnivores. But that said, great question about vegans and vegetarians. And I get this question a lot as a vegan working for a meat company. But I think that, the product we're making is, for all intents and purposes, cruelty-free. We're not harming animals. We have that first incision from a pig, and that's it. So I think depending on your reason for being vegan, that it is accessible to vegans and vegetarians. So if, like I personally, I'm not necessarily disgusted by meat. The reason I choose to not eat meat is because of the environmental impacts, the horrific cruelty to animals, sustainability, the environmental racism. Like it really truly is such a, an industry that has such negative impact on the world. And so that's why I choose to abstain from eating meat. But, I think folks, I guess maybe primarily for health, that maybe they would choose not to eat it. And I even think personally, maybe, I tried cultivated meat and it was delicious, but will I incorporate it into my regular diet? Not necessarily. I've lived almost my entire life as a vegetarian, and I don't feel like I'm missing anything. I actually think many of the plant-based analogs are really good. And I think it probably, as far as vegans and vegetarians go, it sort of maybe depends on your reason why you're a vegetarian or vegan. And certainly if the folks are, content with their current diets. I talked to my parents about it. They're vegan, and they're like, we're okay with our Boca burgers. So, I think it probably varies, but I don't know. I think most of the vegans I've talked to are supportive of it because of the nature of it being not harming animals, being more efficient, much better for the environment with land and water use, et cetera.
Yes. Yeah. If we don't need 9 billion animals being farmed, and we can have sweet little Lucy, who we take one little sample from her and then she's off in her pasture, running around. I mean, what a beautiful way to have animals and not have to treat them the way that we currently are treat them. But then there are people who can still get their, like you said, their quote, real meat without having all that harm and the negative impacts that come with many other things that are involved with it. So
Exactly.
I'm curious, Caitlin, how you felt after eating it. Like, did it upset your stomach? Like, were you fine? Like, not a big deal?
Yeah, that's a great question. First, I will say that it was absolutely delicious. I wasn't sure what to expect, and I actually tried a fully plant-based sausage, so it was kind of the control first, which was really great. I love plant-based sausage; it was delicious. And then I tried the plant-based with 10% meat inclusion, and I was surprised at how different even that small amount of meat could make. It frankly tasted much meatier. It was sort of a bit more savory. And I will say too that I sort of was like, oh, okay, I understand why people do eat meat. It tastes really good. It didn't really affect me. I felt essentially the same. Maybe it's because it was just a small amount of meat and primarily plant-based, or I don't know. I'm really eager to continue trying it and maybe, try sausages that are more animal meat based and sort of see how my body reacts to it. But yeah, it will be interesting, and I'm really keen to try some of the other cultivated products out there too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious for people who, and I like that it's called cultivated meat and not lab grown meat, because I'm sure there's a stigma of like, well, I'm not going to eat something from a lab or, whatever that may look like. But is there anything that people as consumers should be concerned about, or is there anything that maybe people should be worried about that you've come across, or like common concerns that people have about this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I do think that because it's a very new and nascent industry, there's a lot of sensationalism in the media about things that could potentially cause issues or, that people should be fearful of. Like, I know there was a really popular article that was sort of about the potential for lab-grown meat causing cancer. I'm not sure if you saw that or not, but then if you actually read the article, it says, don't worry, we consulted with cancer scientists and there's virtually no, risk of cancer. I mean, in my opinion, it's like clickbait. Like, of course, people want to say lab-grown meat cancer. They want to click on that and be afraid. But if you think about the cancer rates, related to conventional meat, like that's not necessarily in the media. So as far as, and I really have been thinking about this, trying to be objective, because of course, I am supportive of this industry, but I also, of course, want it to be a healthy choice for consumers and not something that people should be concerned about as far as their health goes. But I haven't really seen any concerns. As mentioned, the product is free of antibiotics. It's free of steroids. It's cultivated and grown in a very clean environment. It has to be. I don't think that there are any particular concerns. And if anyone listening does have concerns, folks can always reach out to me with their questions, and I can look into it. So
perfect. I think that's a good point, though, with anything that's innovative or like newer to the market or a new product, there's always questions or concerns. I mean, heck, plant milk is still getting, concerns every once in a while. Like, poor oat milk has been on the chopping block for forever. So I think that's just something that kind of comes with the territory of having something that is incredibly innovative, like cultivated meat, which I think is so cool.
You're absolutely right. In the spirit of this, I saw some headlines from the 1990s that said something like, the internet is a passing fad. And then also there were similar headlines from the 1900s that said, cars are a passing fad. The horse and buggy is here to stay, which really kind of shows that, when you're modernizing a technology, such as taking this very antiquated way of us raising crops to then feed animals. And like, speaking of efficiency, which I was discussing earlier, in order to make conventional animal meat, it takes 100 calories of grain to produce 3 calories of beef. Which is just crazy because, if you think about how you could be feeding those 100 calories of grain to a human being, we could feed many, many more people. So, taking this very inefficient way of creating protein to a more efficient way, and just basically, in my opinion, cultivated meat is modernizing meat technology. Of course, there are going to be naysayers and folks who are, have concerns or even sometimes I think pushback from folks who might feel, potentially threatened by this in terms of their business. But one thing, a lot of people ask me about how this might affect small farmers. And I think that what's really great is that I believe that alternative proteins and cultivated meat can actually work in tandem with small farmers, because the way that we're producing meat through cultivation uses far, far less land. I think something like there was a techno-economic analysis that said it uses 95% less land than conventional meat, which frees up land for people to have small farms, do regenerative farming, that kind of thing. And there have also been cases of, this is actually really cool, I think, small farmers working with cultivated meat companies to provide samples of their animal to produce cultivated meat. So for example, I know in Japan, Wagyu beef is very expensive, and there are these small Wagyu beef farms that are providing samples to a cultivated meat company to produce cultivated meat much more efficiently and
Wow.
cheaply and without harming the animal.
Yes. Oh my
Mhm.
goodness. And too, to be able to kind of turn your land into something that's giving back to the earth versus taking away from it.
Mhm.
And again, this goes back to being open-minded to these changes that are happening in our world, to being open-minded to technology and not being, I hate to say it, closed-minded and kind of just sticking with
Mhm.
the way we've always done things, which doesn't always work, for forever. So I think that's cool that you mentioned that too. I think that's if farmers, especially small farmers, can be open to these changes, it could be really beneficial, like have a really positive impact. Yeah.
Exactly. I know. I was really stunned to learn that over 99% of meat and dairy actually comes from factory farms. The number of small farms in the United States is actually, I mean, it's like almost minuscule. And so
Wow.
if we're able to produce meat in this more efficient way, like as mentioned, that frees up
Yeah.
tons of land for small farmers to actually thrive and have their
Yeah.
businesses.
And with plants taking off, it's more plants we can plant. I mean, there's just so
Exactly.
many things that can be done.
I know, or forests, there can be,
Yes.
there's opportunity for like carbon sequestration, for kind of rewilding the land that's currently being occupied to primarily raise crops such as soybeans. Soy actually, 90% of soybeans actually goes to feeding animals, which is crazy because people often cite soy as being really bad for the environment. And it's like, that may be the case, but actually most of it is for animal feed.
Yeah. Wow. And so it's not even going to like us directly as consumers. It's going to the animals, which then we're eating the animals. Again, just a very inefficient process there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow. So what does this look like for consumers? As in, like, when do you think we're going to start seeing this? Or is it even close to being like in grocery stores? Or what's that kind of looking like right now?
Yeah, great question. So as you may know, in order to sell cultivated meat in the United States, companies have to receive FDA and USDA regulatory approval, which is quite a lengthy process. There are currently 2 companies in the US that have received the green light from the FDA, which are Upside Foods and Good Meat. And Good Meat, as you may know, actually was founded by the founders of Eat Just of Just Egg. So they have the Eat Just venture and they have the Cultivated Meat venture. And they're actually currently selling their product in Singapore, which is the only country in the world that's received the green light from the government to sell cultivated meat. So you can go to Singapore and go to restaurants and eat cultivated chicken there from Good Meat, which is great. But in the US, right now, Upside Foods and Good Meat have received the green light. Upside has said that they hope to bring their product to restaurants as soon as 2023 and to grocery stores by 2028, so a little bit further out there. And as far as Good Meat goes, celebrity chef Jose Andres, who I don't know if you know, but he actually agreed to offer Good Meat's chicken to customers at one of his restaurants in Washington, D.C., which I believe is happening this year too. So I certainly will try to be one of the first customers there to try it. So he'll become the first chef in the world to serve Good Meat, or rather, sorry, in the U.S. to serve cultivated chicken. Those are the 2 companies that have gotten FDA approval. I know that there are a lot of other cultivated meat companies that are currently pursuing that. So I think that people will start to see it in restaurants probably within the next year or so, maybe further along in grocery stores. So for example, at Clever Carnivore, we just started the FDA regulatory approval process, but we're really excited that once our food scientist is sort of like finalized our product, that we will be able to, for example, host pop-ups and tastings, provide some of our sausage to local chefs to incorporate into their dishes. And we won't be selling it, but people will be able to try it, which will be really exciting. So, but yeah, as far as seeing it, I know it's kind of like it's in the ether right now, lab-grown meat, cultivated meat. And I do think that people will start to see it in restaurants relatively soon, maybe in grocery stores a few years later. But it still seems like a really short timeline to me. Like I would say in 2016, I never would have guessed that cultivated meat would be something that I'd be able to try, less than 10 years later.
Yes. Yeah, we were being talked about, really early on, but they were talking about it's going to be like thousands of dollars for a steak or like an absurd number that you could never wrap your head around, even the possibility of eating something like that, or it even being in restaurants, just because it wouldn't be affordable whatsoever. But it sounds like it's going to be for chefs, for restaurants, for eventually grocery stores. It will be something that people can actually buy. Like it's not going to be $1,000 a pound or something ridiculous like that.
Yeah, and you make a really good point about cost. I think people may have seen years ago something like, the $10,000 cultivated steak or lab-grown burger and things like that. And there really are a lot of efforts being made right now to scale up and achieve commercial viability and ensure that this is something that consumers can afford. Specifically at Clever Carnivore, we are really concerned about food security and about ensuring that this is an accessible product. We want this to be something that the Clever Bratwurst is sold in corner stores. And we actually, because of our very efficient method and our low cost media that we make, we're actually going to be able to produce a $1 sausage, which we're really excited about. So we think that we're already competitive with conventional meat, and which is great. And I know that other companies are really trying to get costs down. And this is definitely something that people are talking about, like companies working together and working with industries like breweries and sort of repurposing existing infrastructure to get costs down, because it is, certainly can be costly to acquire all this equipment, things like that. So I know cost is like a really big discussion right now in the space, and people are talking about the major factors and how to get them down.
Sure. Yeah. But a $1 sausage, that's way much more affordable than the $10,000 steak or the burger that they were talking about many, many years ago. So that's really cool to hear that companies have been able to adjust, how they're making things so that it is more affordable for people who can actually be in restaurants and grocery stores.
Yeah, and I think it'll become increasingly affordable as the technology evolves and as more and more companies, join the space, as companies collaborate. I think there are opportunities for companies, small companies that have really impressive technology, or they're really able to get costs down, to be acquired by some of the larger cultivated meat companies, or even by some of the conventional meat incumbents. I know that Tyson and Purdue are both very on board with cultivated meat, knowing that, not that I'm saying that they're saints or anything, but it is kind of a sign of the times that the conventional meat industries are recognizing the benefits and the economic viability of cultivated meat. So that's really exciting.
I feel like, Caitlin, they have to be open to this, because I really truly believe that this is the direction that we're headed, because it's so much more efficient. There's less environmental impact, less animal cruelty. There's so many benefits to eating this way. I feel like these big companies who have been traditionally, raising meat or making meat for years, decades, they have to be open to this stuff.
You're exactly right. And I think that especially seeing these recent supply chain issues with things like eggs being so expensive, I just feel like the very fraught nature of the animal agriculture supply chain is exemplified in these kinds of crises, like avian flu, with egg prices increasing. And I think that the price of animal products is going to continue increasing because of just, the nature of, as we've mentioned, like disease taking place on factory farms and having to cull animals and things like that. I think that it's just going to, cause animal products to become inaccessible. So, the raw materials of supply chain of the cultivated meat is a lot more straightforward and sort of less disruptible, in my opinion, because it really is just requires a sample of an animal and basic components of the media. Yeah.
That's so wild. My mind is seriously blown. I'm just so amazed. We touched on the government regulation and labeling a little bit. Do you see any barriers to that, where just to get this out to the public, is that going to be slow played? Or do you think, obviously 2 companies have been approved so far, but do you think there's any other challenges that will arise with the government approving this kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's a really great question, especially concerning labeling, which I believe is a bit to be foreseen.
Yeah.
But I know that organizations such as the Good Food Institute is really working to both secure government support for alternative protein R&D and also advocate for policy that places all proteins on a level playing field. So I know we've seen lately there have been efforts by the dairy industry to say almond milk is not real milk, and citing consumer confusion. But of course, there's consumer studies that say that people know that almond milk it's not coming from a cow. It's pretty straightforward. So I think similarly with cultivated meat, of course, there'll need to be consumer education around what it really is. But it's still early days. And I think that once people kind of better understand, and I think also are able to see and smell and try the product. Right now, the problem is, I think no one has seen, in probably, very, very few people have seen a cultivated burger in person and been able to try it. So just kind of the unknown, I think, is kind of scary for people. But I think it'll be interesting to see sort of what the labels look like as far as cultivated meat. I know, as I mentioned, our product will be able to say cultivated, Clever Carnivore, the Clever Bratwurst, cultivated, no antibiotics, no GMO, no steroids. So it's, really, I think that when consumers see that the products are potentially cheaper than conventional meat, they taste as good or better, and that they have all these benefits, that they will be incentivized at least to try it.
Yeah, definitely. And I wonder if in the future there'll be a chance similar to breweries or similar to Ben and Jerry's, if y'all have ever been up north, to where you can kind of walk through and even see how it's made, just to get kind of a behind the scenes look, which sometimes makes people more comfortable with like, oh, that's where it's coming from, or that's what it looks like. I wonder if that'll be an option in the future, because that'd be kind of neat.
That's a great question. We actually always say that, joke that we're happy to have people come see how the sausage gets made, literally.
Yes.
And we always say, you know, people would be much happier to see how our sausage gets made than how it's made conventionally in slaughterhouses and meat packing facilities. So if you have the option, if you want to try conventional meat and see how that's made, feel free. I personally will pass, but to see that, you know, we're taking these samples, putting them in bioreactors, and here's the real animal muscle. I think there will be opportunities. And, you know, to the point about efficiency, we love the idea of having cultivated meat facilities in every metropolitan center. So, you know, at the moment, it's basically you have to raise animals in rural areas and you're shipping them back and forth for slaughter. But it's like, if you can just make meat in the heart of New York City, you know, or maybe you have your local neighborhood meatery where the meat is made there. It's kind of like a butchery, but the meat is also made on site. That, you know, that would be a great way to improve accessibility, and especially in places that are like food deserts, for example. You know, you could have the meatery there and people could get their sausage and burgers and bacon.
Right. I didn't even think about that from a transportation perspective, how there's potential for there even to be less cars or trucks on the road because there's less transportation of animals to the slaughterhouse, and then from the slaughterhouse to wherever it goes next, and then to the restaurants and the grocery store. So that's I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, exactly.
Were there any other environmental impacts that we didn't touch on that you wanted to make sure that we did? Because I feel like there are probably so many more than I could ever even imagine.
As discussed, obviously cultivated meat eliminates the need to raise animals for food, and as mentioned, uses significantly less land and water. It emits much fewer greenhouse gases, and also poses a substantially lower risk of foodborne illness and zoonotic diseases. Without live animals to catch and spread disease, there's no antibiotics needed, and there's no likelihood of foodborne illnesses. And I think about things like the avian flu and COVID, and how, you know, disease-causing germs are passed from animals directly to humans, and whereas cultivated meat sort of modernizes meat production and eliminates the need of raising animals for food. So I mentioned the antibiotics thing. It's much more efficient to make, and just like the land and water use specifically, I think is also pretty crucial.
Yeah. And I really just kind of reiterate again, I think it's neat how you can kind of manipulate the saturated fat content, cholesterol content, to change it a little bit for people who are maybe looking to still eat quote real meat, but have it be a quote healthier alternative as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And I actually learned recently that we're able to produce something called brown fat, which I hadn't heard before, but I think it's like the fat that is around the organs, which is sort of better for you, and sometimes harder to access when you're actually raising the animals. So we're even able to sort of adjust the types of fats that we're including in the product. So it is quite like modifiable and customizable.
Yeah. And it's interesting really quickly, because you said something on antibiotics. I remember reading something where someone was expressing concern, well, because there's not antibiotic use, that might actually increase the chance of diseases spreading or different things like that. But it sounds like if it's in a clean environment, just like brewing beer has to be, then the likelihood of contamination has got to be so small.
It's very, very low. And actually, the scientists were telling me that if there is any contamination, it really reveals itself in the media. So this is some science that I'm not fully understanding, but they basically said that it becomes cloudy, or there's like a huge indicator that it's been contaminated. So which is really good to know, because then it's like, okay, we need to start over and make a new batch of this media. So I think it becomes really, you know, very apparent. And you know, as mentioned, we can either make meat this way, or from a contamination perspective, have 20,000 chickens living in a shed and defecating on each other and spreading disease that way. So it's a much cleaner alternative.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Well, is there anything else that I didn't ask, or anything that you wanted to make sure that we touched on that we haven't yet before we kind of wrap up?
I'm just really excited about this technology and this new food. And if anybody has questions about it, feel free to reach out to me. And you can also follow us at Clever Carnivore on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and there's a lot more information about our product there and sort of the way it's produced and things like that. So, but yeah, just kind of reiterating that this is a product that will be accessible to people, and it's better for animals and the environment, for food security, and just overall is a much more efficient way of producing meat that consumers love.
Yep, absolutely. I cannot wait to see this at grocery stores, at restaurants. I feel like this is such a great marketing tool, especially for restaurants and grocery stores. Be like, hey, we have this product. I mean, I feel like people would just flood to try it because it is so new, it is so innovative. So I'm really excited to see it start rolling out in the next few months or year or so.
I am too.
Yeah, and definitely give Clever Carnivore a follow because you'll get to stay up to date on like what's happening and what's going on and when they're releasing things, when they're approved by the FDA, all this great stuff. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that.
yeah, absolutely. Caitlin, thank you so much for coming on and just sharing all this information. My mind again is just blown, and I'm so excited to just see how this changes things in the future because I have no doubt that it's going to.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Ashley. It was such a pleasure talking to you. And thanks for your important work in the plant-based space.
Thank you so much. And thank you for tuning in today. We will catch you on the next episode.
Until next time, keep thriving.